welcome to Choosing Acceptance podcast with your host, Marie Mason. I am here to share some success stories and tips on how to overcome your learning disability so that you can turn your talents into a career. And I love to inspire children and parents and teachers with learning disabilities to go beyond their limits so that they can make a bigger impact in the world. Schedule a call to become a guest on our show at calendly.com/Marie V. Mason. And welcome back to the Choosing Acceptance podcast with your host, Marie Mason. That's me. And we have a great show lineup for you, and you don't want to miss it. And best part is, you don't have to hear me the whole time. We actually have a guest. So we will be sharing some great tips on how to overcome your learning difficulties or disabilities, however you want to term that, and turn your talents into a career. Stick around for some advice from some people who are struggling with a learning disability and how they overcame it, or if they've been working with somebody and how they overcame it. At the end of each episode, we will be sharing you some great resources and how to access them so that they can help you to understand your learning disabilities and how you can overcome them too. We are here to help you provide some great resources and tips because I believe that everyone can succeed at whatever career they choose to do. So I am super excited to have our guest because she's got some great information to share with us today. And her name is Mary Wong, and our topic today is on breaking through with trust, and we will bring her up after the commercial break. So Mary, if you want to say hi, you say hi real quick.
Hi, everyone.
And we're so grateful you're here. I'm sorry?
Lovely to be here. Thank you. Lovely to be here.
And we are so grateful you're here. Trust me. So now, before we get started, let me go ahead and discuss our top tips of the week. We're going to first review what we discussed on last week's episode, which was the 3 common signs of autism. And last week's guest, Susan Boyd, talked about the entrepreneur titans. And she shared many examples of how leaders overcame their learning disabilities and succeeded in their chosen industry. So she painted a really good, powerful, impactful picture of what it looks like to be successful despite your learning, not despite your learning disability, but I've been saying that for so long, I guess it's sort of stuck in my head, Mary, but there's another way of saying it. Someone else said a different way, and I need to adopt that one. But the long story short of it is, you don't have to let your learning disability stop you from succeeding. That's really what I'm trying to paint the picture of. And this month, we're going to be doing a lot more discussions about the topic of the gift of ADHD and finding hope in difficulties. So, and a lot of it's going to be about different aspects of all of that. And so we are going to be starting off by providing a description of what ADHD is in this segment, and then we'll bring up our guests after the commercial. And Mary Wong will be talking about, like I said before, the breaking through with trust. So let's get started real quick, and we'll keep this segment short and sweet, and then bring up Mary. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is what ADHD stands for, because sometimes there's some confusion. It is a common mental disorder affecting the lives of millions of people around the world. Probably would be surprised. You might not even know that they even have it. Okay. It is characterized by difficulty in maintaining focus, attention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. I'm hoping I pronounced those correctly. But anyway, some of them I had to slow down, Mary, just to say them properly. So anyway, ADHD is a multifaceted disorder, and as such can be difficult in accurately describing it. So it is important to remember that everyone experiences ADHD in different ways, and some individuals with this condition may not experience all of the same elements of the diagnosis. There are so many variations to any learning disability. And as we talked about in this podcast segment, autism, the gift of autism with John, he mentioned that his son had different learning disabilities. There was like a mesh of them. There was like a mix of different ones. So you can have ADHD and something else. And you can have ADHD and just have a small, mild case of it. So there's various different degrees of how you experience the elements. So don't just focus on the one element, just look at the different pieces of it. And, a doctor would probably be best to diagnose that, especially someone who's in that field of learning disabilities and understands all that. And there might be some information that Mary can share with us about that as well on the show. But the long story short of it is, it's nothing to be alarmed over. It's actually more common to have ADHD than it's not. And there are going to be future episodes where we can discuss the signs and symptoms of it, as well as one show where we're going to even talk about how to overcome that challenge and ways to combat it and make it work for you. Because, handling it in a school setting or work setting is really crucial. And you can still function inside society and so forth with these kinds of different learning difficulties or learning disabilities. So I just wanted to be clear on that. So the long story short of it is, before we bring up our speaker, Mary, let's hear a word from our sponsors. And we're going to take a short break, and we will see you on the next section of our show. Meet Marie Mason from Charlottesville, Virginia. She is a podcast consultant for Liberty Virtual Solutions. She empowers transformation coaches who want to boost their business with podcasts by brainstorming the content and structure of their podcast. Our proven podcast roadmap will help you to develop a strategy for launching your podcast so that you can grow your business. Rebring your podcast to life at libertyvirtualsolutions.com. And welcome back to the Choosing Acceptance podcast with your host, Marie Mason. I am super, super excited to bring up Mary Wong, who is going to be talking about breaking through with trust. And I just wanted to make sure that I have I don't think I have it. So why don't you go ahead and tell people what it is that you do, Mary, because inquiring minds want to know.
Hi, Mary. Thank you. Thank you for asking. I call myself a conversations coach. I work mostly in the leadership field, helping people with the conversations that they need to have in that space of leadership. Things like conversations of support, conversations of accountability, and navigating disagreements and awkward moments comfortably by being able to say the right words in the right moment. It makes a huge difference to the way that you navigate your space as a leader.
That's true. Because I remember early on in my career path, I was messaging somebody or calling somebody. I think it was a local, U.S. call, because I'm from the U.S. And someone got mad at me because my house has these pockets of internet connections and phone connections. And it boggles the mind. The best place to get access to that internet is in the bathroom. But when I wander around the house and go to a different room, it cuts people off. And it has been doing that for 20 years. So it is not my phone, because I've changed phones several times since then. And I've learned that it is clearly the cell phone service, and the fact that we might be in between towers in certain parts of our house. And I had this one person decide to tell me, and get irate because I hung up on them. And because I called them back, and they're like, I didn't hang up on you on purpose. It was completely, the cell phone signal in my house is not exactly the best at, at hosting it. And this is before I knew about Zoom and any other kind of concept. So the only thing I did do was phone calls. So I only kept my calls in the US at the time. So long story short, he was fuming mad and he thought I did it on purpose. And I had to explain, no, it was not on purpose. It was the phone service. And he still wasn't happy with me. So that never went any further. But, some people just can't get over how things like that happen, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Absolutely, because it's that building that relationship right at the start that puts you in a space where when that happens, because you've already built that trust and got that relationship, where something like that happens, you get away with it. And the other person can have a laugh with you. But when you haven't got that trust in the first spot because you haven't had a chance to, that's when those sorts of things can go horribly wrong. What I tend to do if I know that there's a situation that's likely to occur is I preempt it by letting them know, listen, I'll just want to let you know right at the start that sometimes my phone drops out where I am. So if that happens, please bear with me. I will call you right back. Right at the start of the conversation. Always a really good idea when you know that's a possibility.
I had learned that lesson after that call, and it was probably good I didn't work with that person, because that's not the type of personality I would have liked to have worked with if they were hung up over a small little issue. Could you imagine the big ones? So I'm glad
what's going on for them.
Yeah,
something's going on for them.
So that's a good way of demonstrating the value of, making sure the conversations are clear when you're talking. So that's sort of what you're doing. So it kind of illustrated the point for you. So excellent.
Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. I appreciate you introducing us, because apparently I forgot to sit there and add that into our notes, but that's okay. But that's why I wanted you to introduce yourself. So anyway, and today's topic is, our goal is to help people with learning disabilities to make a difference in the world so they can turn their talents into a career. And so by doing that, it brings up my first question, which is, what is your experience because I know in one of our conversations, didn't you say you are a parent of a child with auditory processing ADHD in school?
Yes. My son has ADHD. He was diagnosed, he was actually diagnosed, he was about 10 or 11 when he was finally diagnosed with it. Prior to that, we had a pretty tumultuous time through school. We had a bit of a bad start anyway, because I'll step back for a moment. This is a very bright, outgoing child. I never had a problem with him being violent. He's got a very gentle nature. He never did any of those sorts of things. He wasn't playing up. His hyperactivity manifested itself in not being able to sit still. And as a baby, for example, you'd think a cyclone had been in a room. He would come in and he would just, and I didn't realise that there was a problem with that. He was my first child, and I just figured he was just a normal, busy baby. When I had my second child, who is also a boy, and I could sit him with a toy and he would still be playing with it 3 or 4 minutes later, I was like, what's going on here? Is there something wrong with this second child? He sits still. But it wasn't until there's 6 years between the two of them. So by the time he was a baby, the first one was already at school, and we were getting reports back from the school teachers saying that he wasn't engaging, he wasn't listening, he wasn't sitting still, he wasn't interested. There's obviously your child is not very intelligent, was one of the conversations that came through. Now, I knew that wasn't right. Is when he started school, they did a language assessment on him, and he was 4 years old at the time, and he tested out at 12 years and 7 months. So he certainly wasn't lacking in intelligence. I knew that. Then they said he can't socialise. Now, I knew that wasn't right, because from tiny childhood, we'd had him up at the playgrounds and all the rest of it, and he was socialising beautifully. There was no problems. Then we had a year 1 teacher who didn't like to have parents in the classroom with her. She wanted to be all alone in the classroom. I found out later that her behaviour wasn't great in the classroom. And I didn't know any of that until the end of the year. Otherwise, there would have been a lot of noise made from my end.
I get that.
She then did nothing at all until about 2/3 the way through the year, called me in and said, your child can't read. He's not going to be able to progress to next year. And I was like, what do you mean my child can't read? And she's like, well, no, he's only at this level, as at level 3, and he should be at level 10 by now. So he's not going to be able to progress next year. We're going to keep him back. And I said, oh, so if you keep him back, can you explain to me what will happen? Well, she said he will be sat in a corner outside of the group where he will work on his own work because he's up with the other stuff. He's just not up with the reading. So he'll sit in a corner by himself and work on his own work while the other children do the catch-up stuff. And I was like, how is that going to help him? So we had these sorts of conversations, and from there I then realised that there was a problem. That teacher and I didn't get on very well, obviously, but I worked very hard. I worked very hard on getting him up to scratch. He progressed at the end of the year, got into the next year level. Then the next year level teacher, who was a very different personality, had parents in the room. We got to witness for ourselves what was going on in class. And I saw what was going on in class, where he wasn't listening. He wasn't, he was fiddling and fidgeting and not listening and never sort of really there. And I was, there's something going on here. And she said to me, he can't get organised. He's very disorganised. But not only was he very disorganised, by that stage, he was also very anxious because he had dealt with 2 years by that point of teachers yelling at him. And what I discovered about the year 1 teacher was she used to throw a book at him if he wasn't listening. So he had dealt with that. I didn't know that. If I'd known that, there would have been, like I said, there would have been some serious conversations going on with the school. Yep. But I didn't know that until it was too late. And by this stage, he not only was not coping at school, very disorganised, very all over the place, but also was quite anxious. So we ended up employing a psychologist to help him. Now, that psychologist did IQ testing on him. He did a whole lot of different stuff. And he said to me, no, he doesn't have ADHD. He just doesn't listen. And at that point, he was diagnosed not long after that. I did some external testing. He was diagnosed with auditory processing disorder. And he said, that's all it is. It's just he has this problem processing the information that's coming in. So he kept saying he doesn't have ADHD. Well, from there, things just got worse and worse and worse. We did all the different things. We had the flip cards that they look at to say, this is what we do in the morning to make sure everything's done. This is what we do at the start of class. Have you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things with you? All of that sort of stuff. And nothing was helping. And he just got more and more and more anxious. It got to the point when he was about 8 to 9 years old, he started developing phobias. He wouldn't sleep at night unless I was with him. I'd sit with him till he went to sleep. I'd go to my own bed and he'd be awake 5 minutes later in my room going, come on, Mum, I can't sleep. And I'd have to go back to his room. Back to the psychologist, who then said, oh, he's having a lend of you. It's not real. He's having a lend of you. He's just demanding attention. And then we had this situation where he said, let him sleep on the floor at the end of the bed. He'll get over it. Don't worry. He slept on the floor at the end of my bed for a year. We were constantly going backwards and forwards to the psychologist. We weren't getting anywhere. And finally, one of the other mothers at school whose child had ADHD said to me, listen, he's very similar to because I was, as mums do, talking to her. Yeah. He's my boy. And I found a really good psychologist. I think you should try her out. So we went to see this psychologist, who was phenomenal. She did proper testing, not just the little bit of testing that the first guy had done. She did the full range. And when she finished her testing, she came out with a stack of papers this high and said to me, how do you and your husband like to take information? Do you like to hear it? Do you like to read it? I was like, this is interesting. She obviously understands the communication aspect of let's talk to their style. And I was like, I'm auditory. I'm quite happy to sit and listen. But my husband is very visual. If he doesn't see it on paper, he doesn't get it.
Doesn't process it. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the way we are. So she said, great, let's make an appointment. The two of you come in and I'll go through these results. So she sat there and gave us a wad of papers each. Okay, turn to this page. You'll see this test. This is what his results are in that test. This is what's gone on there. And so forth. That went for about an hour. At the end of the hour, she said to us, now, the way that we diagnose ADHD is we look at the numbers that come out. There's a scale that you get from all of these various tests. They extrapolate the data and we create this scale. If they are within this level of the scale, they have ADHD. If they are a 12 or above, they need medication. Your child's a 24. So this is after having been told that he didn't have ADHD. And it was one heck of a journey from that point to that point. So then we finally got medication for him, and suddenly we had a different child. We had, within 6 weeks of him starting, because the medication he was put on, because he also had the anxiety disorder, he couldn't go onto the stronger ADHD medication. They put him onto something more gentle. So there's a 6-week run up to getting to the point where it started working. He went from somebody who wasn't with you at the end of a sentence. Like if I was saying, hey, mate, can you go upstairs and get your shoes? I'd get, hey, mate, can you go upstairs? And that would be it. He'd be gone. I'd be like, come back. We haven't finished. The sentence isn't finished. You've got to stay with me, and these are the things that we used to do. So that's the sort of stuff that we went through. So you went from that to someone who you could have a long sentence with and he would still be with you, listening, engaged. It was incredible. It was absolutely incredible. I had home help at the time, a girl that was helping me out because I was working as well. And she said to me, I can't believe it. I feel like I'm looking after a different child altogether. He's just incredibly different. And that made such a difference. Oh, my goodness.
It does when you can when you can give the child the help they need to balance themselves out so they can focus. It makes a huge difference. Also, I've learned since I taught for 20 years as a preschool teacher, and I worked with different learning disabilities also in different schools. One of the things I learned during my teaching career, and also having an auditory perception in my this learning disability as well, was that sometimes with kids that are classified as ADHD, B vitamins or something like a natural supplement also is equally effective or watching their sugar in their diet, watching their diet in general can make all the changes. Some simple little changes in how they, function makes all the difference in the world and how they can function as well and focus. So there are always alternatives to medicine. I'm letting people know now that people were not aware of back when your son was growing up. So, and
there were, and we had tried all of those things. None of it was working. We had, you name it, we tried it. So in fact, when we went in, the day we went in to get the results, my husband said to me, there is no way we are medicating our child. We're just not doing it. And he was absolutely against it. Now, I wasn't keen on it either. Medication is particularly the one that they use for ADHD, is a very strong medication. It has side effects. I mean, it stunts growth. It does all sorts of things, the medication that they use. But when you have a child who just isn't functioning to the level that they're capable of, and you've tried everything and it just isn't getting them there, then sometimes you have to go, you know what, I'm open to other ideas. It was very hard to take that step of going, all right, let's try the medication. But when we saw the difference in him and the way that he could function and how different it was, we wouldn't have the same. He's 21 now, And he's going to university. He got, I know your listeners aren't all Australian, so you won't understand our tertiary system, but he got the highest.
There's some that are.
He got the highest possible tertiary entrance score. Now, life isn't about what your tertiary entrance score is, obviously. There's a whole lot more to life than that. But he got that highest possible score. Now, this was from a boy who was down in C's and D's before he started his medication because he couldn't focus. I remember there was one point where he'd been on this first medication for quite some time. He was a whole lot better than what he had been emotionally. The anxiety was gone, but he had grown quite a bit. This was when he was about 13 or 14, and his maths teacher spoke to us and said, look, you have an incredibly bright child. He has an amazing brain and he's incredible with maths. I know that. And we went, what? He's getting a C. He went, yes, he's actually in a B now. And I know that he's incredibly bright and he has an amazing maths brain because he doesn't focus at all. He has very little focus in the classroom, but he's still getting Bs. If I had his focus, and I'm very good at maths, but if I had his focus, I'd be lucky if I got a D. This child is phenomenal with maths. So he needs his medication reviewed, please. So that's when we went back to the psychologist, because we'd been on one and hadn't changed in that whole time. And that's the other thing about it. As they grow, sometimes it needs adjusting. And we went back and they changed over the medication and he went straight up to an A+. The difference, because he could focus, it's not about taking medication so that you perform better. It's taking medication so that your life becomes better. So when he was able to focus, he was getting bullied and everything when he couldn't focus. That stopped. He was getting, he was in trouble all the time. That stopped. His way of socializing, of looking at life, of making friends, everything changed because he could engage. And it really is about what's the best outcome you can get for your child so that they can have a normal life. He still sees that same psychiatrist because it has to be a psychiatrist who diagnoses and prescribes those medications. I don't know what this.
We have the same thing. Yeah. There's psychiatrists that do not prescribe, I think, and then there's psychologists that do prescribe. So I think we have something very similar in the U.S. too. So
yeah, because the psychologist is not a doctor, but the psychiatrist is. So the psychiatrist has to be the one who prescribes here. Precisely. So that's how that works. But he still sees that same psychiatrist, and he is still on medication even as an adult. And that psychiatrist has said to us, there are some people who need to stay on medication for life. He said, I think Daniel's going to be one. Oh. A lot of the children who are on medication can come off as they become adults. And in that case, it really is about navigating the school system and being able to get them through so that they get the learning that they need so they can function as an adult. And the other things will keep them leveled out, those other techniques that you talked about. One of the biggest problems that we face. Sorry.
Before you go into that, I just want to ask one quick follow-up question with that. You had said he's now in college. Has he chosen, just really briefly, has he chosen a profession, and what is it?
Yes, it was interesting. He's been through a couple of iterations before he chose. He always wanted to do something with computers. He wasn't quite sure what. He was doing a dual degree with engineering and information technology, which is computer science. He then changed to engineering and computer science, and then because he moved universities, and then he dropped engineering because he hated it. And he's just done computer science as a pure thread. But he's done so well in that. He's right at the top of the group. He's doing marvelously in it. He's only 1 year to go, and he's just got himself an internship with Amazon. He's working with Amazon, which is huge in the computing world. He explains to me it's huge in the computing world because Amazon's very selective about who they'll take. That I think speaks for itself if you understand the level that you have to be at. to be, and he is loving it. He's having the best time.
Congrats.
Working really hard and in a great team and really enjoying it and going, Mum, I really want to work for them full time. So, and I couldn't wipe the smile off his face for weeks when he got the notification that he had that role. Very, very excited. I've never seen him so excited about it.
Big congratulations to all of you, because that definitely was a big, huge milestone for him to be able to go from where he was to have a successful potential career in place when he gets done with college. So really kudos to everybody who helped out with that. So you were going to share with me some of the challenges, I think it was.
I think the biggest challenges, and particularly I think when you medicate your child, there's this sense that you've somehow failed them, that you had to go into medication. And I think that's a bit of a shame. There is sometimes with people and a tendency to say, okay, there's a problem, let's throw some drugs at it. And drugs, of course, being medication.
Right.
That is something that we do come up against on occasion with children with these disorders. The thing is that a parent generally won't resort to medicating their child unless they absolutely have to. And that certainly was our case. We had tried everything. And then when you medicate your child, you yourself have this judgment of, there must have been something else I could have done. Did I really have to do this to him? Not only that, as the mother, what did I do when I was pregnant that created this? All these sorts of questions go through your head, and you have to reconcile those questions and those thoughts with what's going on in their life, and looking at where they're at and what they're doing, so that you can go, it's okay. I can live with that because I know the difference now from what he was at before. He used to do things like he would just, as a small child, he would just fall down on the ground. That was his impulse control issue, was falling down. Didn't matter where we were, he'd fall down on the ground. He'd just fall down. He wasn't throwing a fit or anything else. He'd just fall down and be like, oh, for goodness sake, get up, please. You're embarrassing.
And it was probably just his response. It was for him. He didn't know how else to respond.
That was how he kind of dealt with what was going on for him. Things like that. He would do all sorts of things like that you just go, oh my gosh. And they're the sorts of things that that other people look in and go, why can't that parent control their child? And I've heard it said, oh, for goodness sake, he's too old for that behaviour. People come and say things to me. And people still, not so much to me anymore because he's an adult now and people aren't even aware. People will say to me, if I say to them, oh, he's got ADHD, they'll go, well, no. But I know what he's like in the morning before he takes his medication. He'll get out of bed in the morning and he paces. He has this pacing thing that he does because he just can't. That's how he works off his energy. And he'll pace and he'll be all over the place, and he'll get his medications out, put them on the table, and he'll pace some more, and he'll go off and do something else, and and you can't get 3 words out of him. And then finally he'll come in and take his medication and keep pacing. And within about 15 minutes, you see him sort of wind back down to being able to function at that normal level. And he's like, oh, okay, sorry, Mum, what was it you wanted to know before? I know you were talking to me, but I just couldn't deal. And it's that regulation that's what it helps him with. It's like his brain is missing the hormones, and we can't seem to get him to create them naturally. So that's why the medication's there, to sort those hormones out. So there's this judgment that you face. And I saw it on social media in two occasions very recently. Last night, I saw someone who amazingly was a diversity and inclusion officer, was his role at work, saying, I think you need to knock off the Skittles, mate, to somebody with ADHD. It's about, oh, don't be ridiculous. ADHD doesn't exist. You just need to knock off the Skittles, mate. And I was like, wow. That guy should not be a diversity and inclusion officer because he obviously has no understanding
People are a little clueless sometimes when it comes
yeah,
to recognizing the symptoms. That's why this podcast is here, is to
yeah,
really get clear on the definitions of what is and isn't a learning disability or some kind of disorder. And then also to get the point where people can recognize the signs and symptoms and also seek solutions and resources, because I feel like we need to have a better understanding of
yeah,
of learning disabilities and a lot more tolerance. And I wouldn't even say tolerance because that never got us anywhere back in the 80s or 90s. And more acceptance of who they are as individuals, and better understanding of how they operate. Like that psychologist you gave a great example of, who really understood what you and how you and your husband communicated differently. I think that's more of where we need to lean towards on how we
yes,
people. I really believe that. So
yes.
you were spot on with that. And then from the judgment of others, and it's really harsh. So how do you build trust with others, especially after it's been broken for something snide remarks? It'd be very hurtful, especially if you're a 24-year-old or 21-year-old, or even as the parent of one. How do you guys overcome and build trust back with people who might be close to you and just don't understand the situation?
Yeah. And there are people close to us as well who still will come out with those sorts of things. And it's like, I get that everyone's different. Everyone is different, and everybody has different approaches to life. Some people are more open than others to listening, and sometimes it's a lost cause. Sometimes it's just not even you. You've just got to go, okay, that's you, and I'm going to let go of that, and I'm not going to have an attachment to that. But there are situations like your teachers, for example, when they were going through school, we had to have a strong, trusting relationship with those teachers so that we had open communication, so that when an issue came up, like, for example, that maths one that I talked about before, we were both comfortable with having that conversation. And to get to that point, it's really important that you be very transparent about anything that you're doing, anything that you're saying, that you're, the reasons for your conversations. And usually what I would do is at the start of the year, when I knew who the teacher was, I'd organise a meeting with the teacher. I'd go in and go, okay, so just so you know, you're going to be hearing from me a lot this year. And that's not because I'm the helicopter parent. It's because in the past we've had issues that weren't raised until they became big issues. And I'm very proactive. I like to sort an issue before it becomes an issue. It's really important to me that we communicate really well, so that if an issue comes up, we can get it sorted. I'm here to support you. I'm not here to question your authority or the way that you do things. I'm here to support you. I know my child very well. I know, he is a wonderful and marvelous child, and I'm sure every parent tells you that about their child. But he is also a child with issues, and I am very aware of his issues. So please always feel comfortable in coming to me and talking to me about anything that arises. So it is about being very transparent.
Yep.
Having that relationship, building that relationship, continuing. So if the teacher does come with something that you don't agree with, asking questions around what they're saying, going, oh, that's really curious, using those softeners in that space. Oh, it's really curious. I've not seen him exhibit that behaviour before. Can you tell me a little more about the situation? What happened? What else happened around it? I'm wondering if there was something that triggered that behaviour or that created that issue in the first place, that we could, maybe that's not the central issue. Maybe there's another issue that there's no awareness around because you don't know him, or not know. That would be slightly different. There's less awareness around because you don't know him as well as I do, that sort of thing. So building that relationship, having that mutual understanding between the two of you, where you each understand what it is you're doing, and shared vision of what success looks like. So what is it that we're working towards with him? So, for example, the shared vision of success, in that grade 3 class where he was still really struggling with organisation was the fact that he turned up to a class with his pencils. And now that wasn't a big thing to do, but for him it was, because before that, he didn't ever turn up with his pencils. He was always needing to use someone else's pencil or disturbing the class because he didn't have what he needed. So that was our first thing and the teacher and I worked it out together. Okay, what's the first step we need to work on with him? He needs to bring his pencils to class. Okay, let's make that a big thing for a while and make sure until that pattern is easily repeatable. Small things. Doesn't have to be huge. Small things can make a huge difference. And then truth, making sure that you're very honest. So when there were occasions where the teacher, something happened, oh gosh, there was this occasion where when you're a child with something like ADHD and your behaviour, and this was before he'd been diagnosed, he was at a school that was mostly a girls' school. There were only a couple of boys. And some of those girls, some of them were awful. And there was this one little girl who kicked him constantly one day, just kept walking up to him and kicking him. And he kept saying, stop doing that. And she'd do it again. And stop doing that. And this went on and on for the entire morning until morning tea. And at morning tea, I was working in the tuck shop that day, and he came, which is the cafeteria. He came running down to me, absolutely distraught. I said, mate, what's wrong? Going on? And he took ages. I had to sit with him and calm him to tell me what had happened. And he said, the teacher has just told me off. He had gotten in major trouble with the teacher because he had pushed this girl. He had gotten to the point where he turned around and went, stop it, and pushed her backwards. And then all the girls went, you're a violent boy, you're a nasty, violent boy, how dare you do this? And then the teacher had a go at him and told him he'd grow up to be a wife basher and all this sort of thing. And he was distraught. This is a very gentle-natured boy, and this child had been kicking him for about 3 hours at this point. So I went to the teacher and I said, look, we have an issue. I hear this is what's happened, that he's been in trouble, that he pushed this girl and he's in trouble for pushing the girl. She's like, oh, absolutely, his behaviour was terrible. And I said, yes, and I agree, absolutely, that he must not ever lay a hand on another person. It's not acceptable, etc., etc. However, are you aware that that girl had been kicking him for 3 hours and he had been asking her to stop 3 hours before that? And she went, oh. Well, it's still not acceptable. And I went, I know it's still not acceptable, but you need to go deal with that girl, because that's not right
either. Right.
That's not right. Violence comes from both genders. It doesn't just come from boys. And he had been pushed until he got to a point where he couldn't stop it. Now, what we need to talk about is how, A, you make sure that the girls understand that that's not behaviour, or that not acceptable behaviour, and B, what to do when somebody is not listening to you, when you're asking them to stop behaviour. What is the next thing you need to do? He should have gone and reported that to you. He shouldn't have pushed the girl. He should have gone to you and said, listen, she's been kicking me all morning. I've been asking her to stop and she's not stopping. And that would have stopped this from happening. However, if you're going to just punish my child in this situation, you're not doing the right thing, either by him or by the girls. And it's important that you do. Now, we had the strong enough relationship at that point that I could be frank and honest with her to sort that situation out. We wouldn't have been able to sort that situation out if we didn't have that relationship, if we hadn't done all those other things in preparation to get to that point where I could be brutally honest with her. It just wasn't good enough and it needed to be sorted. So I was able to do that.
Right. And you also clearly illustrated about how do you help people have those conversations where you can work all together, because that's a good example of what you just described, because sometimes one of the things I paint in my book, in my Learning Bubble Bear Special Problem, all about, actually it's on dyslexia, and it's going to be a series of different books. But one of the things I do paint is you're seeing it through the viewpoint of the child. So you're experiencing what they're experiencing. And one of the scenes in that book, illustrates where the teacher doesn't see what caused Bubble Bear to go and push his friend.
Yep.
She wasn't paying attention to the full scope of the picture. So she went to go and correct his behavior, but in a kind, gentle way. But at the same time, again, just like with that situation with the teacher, wasn't aware of how he was being kicked. Same thing. It is the same situation. So I think what it is, it's conversations are more about bringing awareness to things that they're missing because they're only seeing it from one linear position. So I'm really glad that you're having those conversations with people. And since we're actually having to wind down, we're not going to get to the other question I was hoping to. Maybe we'll save that for another show. But long story short, I know that you have a resource you would like to share with our group. I think you mentioned something that you wanted to share.
I'm actually starting a podcast myself. It's called Optimal Conversations. And that podcast is around how conversations can change the world and not just, I'm a very global thinker, so I'm always like, it's the world. And that world might be as minute as your relationship with one other person. So when I say the world, it's changing your world. How being able to have those good conversations can change your world. And we have some really exciting guests lined up, including a chap in Kenya who is now running a not-for-profit organisation, and he now has a couple of hundred children being sponsored through school, all through a conversation that he had with a man when he was a 14-year-old who couldn't go to school. And it's quite the most inspiring, and I get goosebumps every time I think about him. His name's Tommy, and every time I think about him, I get goosebumps because of his story. So he's going to be my first guest, and that she'll be starting hopefully fairly soon, probably mid-February, I'm hoping. And because, as you know, because you run podcasts, there's all these things you've got to do before you start.
It's a checklist. You've got to make sure you cross your T's and dot your I's, so to speak. Yeah, I get that. A lot of follow up and follow through, especially if you're booking guests on your podcast too. So I get that.
Absolutely. Yes.
Can't wait for it to come out. I hope you share that with our audience as well.
That will be on all the major places where you listen to podcasts. So yes, Optimal Conversations. So keep an eye out for it. Otherwise, pop over to my website if you'd like to know more and get in touch with the contact form.
Right, and the website is
www.optimalcoaching.com.au. Don't forget the .au.
Yes, because you're in Australia.
So have a .au on the end.
Yes, you got it. People with Australia do have a different version of that. So thank you for that. So I really appreciate you sharing that journey with your son and how encouraging that he's succeeding in life. And it's all because you had to make a few tweaks in how he changed some of his behaviors, and the medicine really helped him to focus. So there are solutions. Some are as mild as supplements, and some are mild, and some you have to go with the extension of medicine. But it's all, like you said, to help give your child a quality of life so they can thrive. So maybe summarized it for you. So I think that's brilliantly put. So really quick, I'm going to do a quick promotion of my book, like I mentioned earlier. I am the author of Bubble Bear's Special Problem, and I'm super excited about it because I wrote it in 1989 in college, and I published it in March of 2022. And so it just goes to show it doesn't matter how long the journey is, it's just getting there. And this book is really about destigmatizing learning disabilities in order to provide them a better understanding of their learning process, because it is a process. And like you were saying earlier, we all learn different, we all have different ways of processing information. So it helps children to overcome the fear of their learning disabilities so they can contribute their talents and turn them into a career. And simply by bringing awareness of how children should be treated in and out of the classroom, no matter what their age is, no matter what level they're in. Because I've seen it at the preschool levels all the way up to college levels on how people have been treated in the classroom. So go check it out. It's on Amazon. It's going to be working towards getting it published in the bookstores sometime this year. So look for that, and I'll let people know when that occurs. And I really want to say thank you to Mary Wong for sharing some valuable tips on how our audience can grow their business and themselves on the Choosing Acceptance podcast. And our topic was on breaking through with trust with Mary Wong. And oh my gosh, we had some great examples from your son's life and your life on how you accomplished all that. And I really encourage you to take advantage of her offer, which will be posted on both not only social media, but also on our YouTube channel. And that will be the Choosing Acceptance podcast. Please make sure you go check that out. It's completely devoted to this particular podcast series. And you can also contact Mary Wong on her website at, make sure I have this correct, Mary, but www.optimalcoaching.com.au. Is that correct?
That's absolutely right.
I always have to second guess myself, so I wanted to make sure I got it correct, but awesome. So watch for her podcast, which is coming soon, and I can't wait to hear it. And then join us again next week for our next episode for more great tips on how to overcome your learning disability and achieve success too. So we stream on our YouTube channel every week. It's not going to be on a specific time frame during the winter months because we do have some snowstorms that sometimes shut our power down. So occasionally, right now we're doing a warming trend, and just because our power has been a little bit fluctuating during the winter months, if we do have heavy snow, it does knock it out sometimes. I am not going to try to box myself into a specific time and release date for the podcast, but it will be out every week, and we cannot wait to share each guest each week. And this episode will be shared next week with our audience, just so you know. And we love for you to make sure you like, subscribe, and hit the notification button. We'd love to hear from you too. So please let us know if you like a show, want more information connecting to the guests, or even to have an idea for a topic. Because sometimes you never know, that topic might become a topic for a show. So anyway, please make sure you do check our Choosing Acceptance Facebook group on Facebook. And until next time, I'm your host, Marie Mason, with our guest, Mary Wong. And we're saying goodbye now from the Choosing Acceptance podcast. And you have a great week. Bye now.
Bye.
My name is Marie Mason. I am the author of Bubble Bear Special Problem. And this book destigmatizes learning disabilities in order to provide a better understanding of their learning disability process. It helps children to overcome their fear of learning disabilities so that they can contribute their talents by bringing awareness to how children should be treated in and out of the classroom. If you would like more to learn about this book, then go to Amazon.com and check out Bubble Bear Special Problem by Marie Mason.